Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Nova Roma from Stan Kodonsky and Half a Kingdom Games. Nova Roma is a 1-4 player Euro game that's sort of worker placement, but not exactly, as the players operate around this action grid which they're going to place workers in to take actions from the row and column with varying strengths depending on, well, a whole bunch of things. Let's go ahead and get into this. Before I do though, this is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and this will be over on Kickstarter. I'll have a link to the Kickstarter in the comments in the description down below. But with that said, this is a game that's going to play out across 5 rounds. In every single round, players are going to place their 3 workers onto the board into this action grid in order to take actions based on the row and column of the specific actions. There are 8 core actions in the game, each leading you in different directions, some degree of intertwining between the actions, and you're trying to be mindful of what actions suit your engine, as well as the strength of the action based on the initial starting piece over here that's going to be placed into the grid, as well as based on the subsequent workers you are adding to the grid. So you're trying to be mindful of a lot of things, and I know there's a lot going on the table over here. Don't get too intimidated. We'll go through each action one at a time, but from there, let's go and start this off. So, every single round, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to turn over this tile over here. This tile is going to give the first player the opportunity of where to place this person. Let's go ahead and clear the grid for a second. You're going to choose based on one of the 2 spots over here, whether the place is here or here. Now, that's going to give you choice based on the specific direction you're trying to take, because that will augment the strength of the action. Action strength can be between 1 and 3. It can never go higher than 3, and it's always going to be a minimum of 1, but if this guy's in play, it's going to be at least 2. Because let's say we go ahead and we place it down over here. We're going to put it there. That's going to give us that action. And by the way, these actions over here, these are distributed randomly at the beginning of the game, which means every game you're playing with a slightly different configurations of actions, and even the small subtle shift of whether an action is in the same row or bi-directional, cross-directional from another action will completely change the way you approach the game. From there, on your turn, once you've set that piece over there, you're going to grab one of your pieces and you're going to place it into the row or column. In this case, I'm going to go over here, which means I'll be taking this action at a strength 2, because I have these 2 over here, and this action as a strength 1. The other player might come in and go ahead and take this action, which means I'll take this action at a strength 1, because there's only 1 there, and this action at a strength 2. Back to me over here, although strictly speaking with a 2-player game, there's an additional sequence we do here, but back to me over here, if I go ahead and place this down over here now I'm taking this action at strength 1, and this action at strength 2, because I have 2 of my own people. I am not taking this action at strength 2 because of the other person. You only count your own people and the neutral piece. We'll go back over here, and this person will take an action here, a strength 2 over here, and a strength 2 over here, and a strength 1 over here. And then I'll go back to over here, where I'll take this action at a strength 3 now, because 1, 2, 3, and this action at a strength 1, and over here we'll take this one, strength 2, and strength 1. So you can see that as you place things into the grid, you are augmenting the strength of your actions, and that's before the fact that cards, certain cards you can have, advisors you can buy throughout the course of the game, can further augment the strength of the action, as well as additional perks and benefits you get from the actions. That's the core idea of the action grid system. So every single placement is effectively buying you 2 different actions at different strengths, or possibly different strengths. You're doing that 3 times per round across 5 different rounds, which means you have 15 placements, 30 total actions, but it's the strength of the actions and the additional things that are happening throughout the game that will lead to your specific puzzle and how you're trying to find your way to victory. Which brings us to the various aspects of the board that are going on here. There's a few different ways to get points in here, all of them tied to the various actions, and one of the actions is sort of a wild action, but let's go ahead and get through that. We're just going to walk you through these around this grid. This action over here lets you put people, you're going to have these pieces over here that you can go ahead and put them onto your board, or you can go ahead, so you can either place them onto your little grid over here, or you can gather new ones. So for each strength of this action, this little white symbol means strength, you will either put down a piece and you'll take the various grid benefits over here. So for example, if I put this guy down over here, I'll take the tile that it's on, as well as the intersection of what it has, and gather resources that way. But the strength of the action means I can also add, I can pay wheat to add new people to the board. Effectively, this is monopolizing your little puzzle over here, although there's other aspects going on to this puzzle. Over here is how you're going to be getting new advisors onto the board. New advisors over here, you're going to look over here, and based on the strength of the action, you'll draw that many advisors, 1, 2, or 3, and then based on the strength of the action, you'll pay 2, 1, or 0 to play a new advisor in play. Be mindful of a maximum hand size of 6, and that once you start playing more than 4 advisors, you have to start paying extra currency, this influence over here, in order to be able to place additional advisors, meaning getting a whole bunch of advisors are great, either for in-game scoring, end-game benefits, things like that, but once you go above 4, you need to be mindful there's an additional cost. To that end, as far as advisors go, advisors mostly either augment the strength of actions. So the translate over here lets you take that action at +1 automatically once per round. This action over here lets you, when you take the chariot action, you can pay a coin to place a person onto your grid, so additional ways of kind of taking extra actions. Alternatively, you also have endgame scoring. So for example, the musician over here will give you a point for every advisor you have, which can really help lean in towards a very power boost as you go through the game. So lots of different things the advisors will do, but that's how you get all of those into play. Over here, we're going to look at the building cards. When you take an action over here, you'll buy building cards at either strength 1 for these ones, 2 or 3, so giving you access to different building cards, and then depending on the strength of the action, you can place them into zones 1, 2, or 3. You can see over here, if you did strength 1, you can only place zone 1. If you did strength 2, you can do either of these, and strength 3 lets you get into all of these, which is why they're worth progressively more points as you go through them. This is basically an area control puzzle that will reward you with 5, 3, or 1 points based on who has the most in any sphere, but then additionally giving you certain bonuses. Once these various tiles are completely surrounded, you'll get those bonuses as well. So you're building buildings, which will give you points in and of themselves. You're going for an area control puzzle, which will give you points, and then you're also getting bonus tiles when you go there. Over here we have the ship tiles. The ship tiles over here, going navigation, is going to allow you to buy cards over here. So again, we have zones 1, 2, and 3. Those are the ships you can go ahead and buy, gathering those cards. But then additionally, what you're going to do with those as well is you're also going to be able to move slowly around the board as you take those actions. So for example, over here, if you did a strength 3, and you'll look over here, the strength over here, if you bought a ship, you'll go ahead and move around the board, and you can go ahead and do, let's say a strength 3 would go 1, 2, 3, because based on the 1, 2, 3, some of these zones do have 2s on them, so you have to be mindful of that, taking that into account as you move, and you'll get the immediate bonuses of certain zones, as well as the scoring bonuses if you cross certain numbers, and then finally when you get to the end over here, you can get 14, 12, or 10. So effectively, you're taking a bit of a navigational aspect, you're paying into the ship cards, and then you're moving slowly around the board. And lots of these things will be mindful for bonuses as well. We haven't heavily gotten some of the bonuses sections. From there we go over here to this action. This action is a bit of a wild action. You can pay 2 influence over here to take the first player marker, but additionally you can pay 1 influence based on the strength of the action to take any action at that strength. So if you have a strength 2 action over there, you can pay 2 influence and then take any action at that strength, which gives you a lot of flexibility, but you are paying influence into that flexibility, so you need to be mindful of that. From there we have the chariot action. That's going to be this little racing puzzle over here, where as you pay the base on the strength of the action, you'll move forward that many spaces on these various tracks over here. That's going to be giving you points based on the current favorite track. You know the favorite track and you know the upcoming favorite track, but additionally if you get to the end of the track, you get an additional 5 points. Whenever you cross a track, you have to expend horses in order to cross those tracks, but then whenever you hit these little spots over here, you'll get extra markers, either extra influence or extra scoring markers. We'll talk more about those scoring markers later, but those are effectively ways of getting chunks of extra bonus points, and they are not to be underestimated. You start the game with 4 and you can earn 3 extra based on these tracks, and getting those 3 extra will give you a lot of flexibility in scoring a bunch of points on your own little scoring grid puzzle that we haven't heavily talked about over here. From there we have this action over here, which will effectively let you go ahead and you'll take money. Let's move these over here. You'll take this action over here. Will let you take money based on the strength of the action. And then you can also discard people you're not using and in order to get more money. And then lastly, you can trade in money to get any good of your choice. A bit of the best way to get money in the game, as well as to trade them in for various resources. And then lastly, this action over here is how you're going to improve your little grid over here. You're basically going to get influence based on the strength of the action. You can trade in wine to get more influence. And then you can take 1 tile from this section over here, adding it to your grid, and that's going to give you a bunch of different options, either one-time use tiles, a bunch of animal tiles that are useful for endgame scoring, or alternatively resource tiles that when you put your people down them, you get more from that action because you're getting the cross sections, but also the action itself, and building out this grid can be an extra source of resources in the game. Those are the primary 7 areas you're going through. Again, 8 actions, 1's a wild, 7 of them are going to be the core actions. The buildings, the way you gather buildings, the way you move around the ship track over here, the way you gather advisors, the chariot racing over here, the way you build out and improve this tableau, the way you put people on the tableau himself, and I'm missing one. The last one is this one over here, this area where you can just get money and go ahead and trade that in for resources. Now you're doing this thing for a variety of reasons. Moving on the ship track will give you points here. Building buildings will give you points. Getting area control will give you points. But additionally, you want to be mindful of the fact that you have a little scoring grid over here that you're looking at. These are tiles you can either distribute randomly for your first game, or as you get better at the game, you'll want to start drafting them so you have a bit more control of how you build this out. But there are 3 different sets of tiles here, level 1, 2, and 3, that are giving you different scoring objectives. You're going to start the game with 4 of these tokens, and whenever you achieve one of these objectives, you can go ahead and once per round, once per turn, you can place one of these down. So when I've got to my 4th building card, I can put this here, which will be worth 3 points at the end of the game based on the row it's in, 2, 3, or 5. When I've got to my 6th shipping card, I can place this down and boom, I get 5 scoring points. But then additionally, if I have 1 scoring card and 1 tile over here, I can put this down, and not only will I get the 2 points and the resource, which happens in the first row, but I'm also going to score for this diagonal. Over here, this diagonal here is going to give me influence, accessory, and go ahead and give me money over here, and give me 2 points as well. And you're being mindful of that for all of these. Any row, column, or diagonal is going to score you points, giving you progressively more points for scoring full rows, but you need to unlock more of these because you only start with 4, and you unlock additional 3 from this track over here, which can open up a lot of pathways for how you want to score in the game. And that's basically what's going on in Nova Roma. You are placing people down into a grid. You are taking actions based on the strength of the actions in the grid, which means you need to think through what you're trying to lean into, because doubling down the same actions will often increase the strength. You're gathering advisors that will boost those various actions throughout the course of the game, as well as give you endgame scoring. And then you're trying to encompass this entire puzzle to score as many points as possible by combining things efficiently as you go through it, and that is Nova Roma. With that, let's go ahead and dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. For the most part, this is a prototype taken into account, but the rulebook is fairly easy to go through. Everything was fairly straightforward for the most part. I had very few questions. Game time is going to vary, but I'd say 60 to 90 minutes, possibly a drop over 90, either with AP prone players or at higher player counts. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, the biggest compelling thing here is this action grid, is this action puzzle over here. Not just the action puzzle in and of itself, but the fact that the combination of actions is going to force you to reapproach the game every single time. Inherently, when you place something down, you're taking from 2 different sections of the board, which means leaning into different combinations of things will change based on how this grid set is set up, which gives you a degree of replayability just from that alone, before we even get into how the advisors come out or how anything else in the game happens. But this puzzle is rewarding in the sense that you're inherently going to be taking some stronger actions and some weaker actions as you play through this puzzle, and trying to figure out which stronger actions and which weaker actions are going to run you, or which are going to give you the best engine, is a big part of the puzzle as you play through Nova Roma. And then being mindful of the other players at the table too. How are they approaching it? One thing we haven't talked about is in a 2-player game, there's a bit of a blocking aspect where after each turn, each of your first 2 turns, you'll be placing these various people down to the grid in order to make this grid a bit more tighter and block it out a bit, which the difference between 2 and 3 players is actually a bit more cutthroat at 2, since 3 players is a little bit more, we're doing our 3 different things and we may get in each other's way, versus 2 players is kind of, I'm intentionally going to try to block you, which makes it a slightly tighter game, especially if you're playing it with a bit more meanness, which is hard not to when you literally have a character that's just for blocking in the game. But this action puzzle over here is the core thing going on. Everything else ties together nicely, everything else works, but the whole puzzle of how you're going to take different actions with different strengths is a big part of what I like about Nova Roma. And you can never get everything done in this game, which is something I tend to like in games to an extent. It depends on the game. I find that every game has a different sweet spot of me feeling like I didn't get enough done versus feeling like I want to dive back in because I want to experience more of that game, and Nova Roma definitely has the latter. It gives me enough things that I get done. I'm able to go ahead and, maybe I'll populate this grid over here and also go ahead and get a ton of advisors, but maybe I didn't explore the shipping track enough, and maybe I really didn't build up my grid enough, and also the racing wasn't an area that I heavily competed in. Every game's going to be a bit different as far as the areas you try to maximize versus the areas you dabble in, and that gives you a reason and a reason to dive in again and again, a reason to try to figure out just that taste of, I want to get a bit more done, I want to do a little bit more in this game, and I got so close, and maybe I fully maximized the racing track, but I didn't really get to that last spot over here, and I ended up just shy, and I could have gotten 14 points there. There are all these different ways that things combine, and the advisors to me are exactly what I like in games. They're the powers and abilities. They're the way you break the rules to a degree, the way you go ahead and you get a bunch of advisors that augment a certain type of action. So you're taking that action at a more powerful ratio. You're also able to draw people into your farming grid when you take that action by paying a coin. You're also taking additional resources when you take that action. And that gives you an additional reason to try to dive into that action and your own special, unique power, so to speak, as far as the areas you're stronger in the game. And then you combine all that with that little miniature scoring grid that each player is dabbling in, as far as the fact that you're going to start the game by drafting tiles that you think work well together, and then you try to lean into that as you play, and try to score as many points as possible onto that grid. And it's something that you definitely don't want to ignore, but the question is how much further you dive into it is going to depend on how much you engage with the racing track, but if you do those well, you can certainly score a ton of points, but I've also seen players win the game without dabbling more than the 4 basic tokens they get, and so there's a lot of pathways to victory as you dive into this. There's a lot of pathways to victory as you try to think through, hey, you can get a ton of points points from shipping over here. You can get 2 of your boats to the top and get 26 points. That's incredible. But you can also get a chunk of points for building buildings, since every building gives you points, but you also get the area control bonuses. Or you can just lean heavily on advisors, and the advisors are going to not just improve your in-game scoring by giving you additional things, not in-game scoring, in-game abilities by giving you just different things, but you're also going to score end-game points if you pick the right advisors. You can get a bunch of advisors, 3 or 4 advisors that give you endgame scoring and get 30 points from that alone if you do it well. 30 might be ambitious for 4 advisors. You might need 5 advisors for 30 points. But you can get a chunk of points from every different area you dabble in here. And so the pathways of victory, combined with the fact that you can't get everything done, combined with the action grid and the bonus scoring over here, just gives you a very compelling puzzle as far as what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it in Nova Roma. As far as what I don't like in the game, I wish the ship cards and the building cards were a drop more interesting. The ship cards and the building cards feel like they're just the various combinations of resources. The building cards at least give you different shapes as far as how you have to put buildings down over here. There's 4 basic shapes, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1, and 4 basic shapes as far as what you're doing there. And the ship cards just feel like they're a bunch of resources. They do the job as far as the game goes, but I wish they were more interesting, more compelling. For the most part, it feels like they're there and they're moving through a row, but I didn't feel, very rarely did I feel particularly rewarded for having access to additional spots. Sometimes it happens in ship cards because you'll have that one resource card that's a little better and easier to do than the multiple resource cards, so that can happen. And sometimes you're trying to score that 4 building spot, so it definitely happened that you were rewarded for getting to the 3rd spot and having access to that, the new spot on the board. But just as often, I just didn't feel they were overly compelling. I wish there was something a bit more exciting about them, although obviously anything exciting with them has to be incorporated in the game design. That's a whole different ballpark. It's easier to tell you what I want in a game than to actually build it myself. But I do wish the ship cards and building cards were a drop more interesting in the game. Additionally, I'm not a fan of the once per round limitations that some of the characters have over here. Very often the things you do in the game are, well, once per round. So when I take this translate over here, I know that I can boost the strength of my action when I go here, but only once per round. When I do certain actions, there are a few cards that will give you kind of infinite generation, but very few of them. Most of them are limited to either endgame scoring or once per round abilities, which means when I take a card in that first round, I know that I'm going to benefit from it exactly 5 times at most. And then if I take a card in the 3rd round, I'm benefiting from it 3 times or 2 times, depending on what I'm taking or what I'm doing, which kind of puts you into a bit more of a mathematical, how exactly beneficial is this going to be? It limits the power of the card, but also limits the kind of imagination of just how much I can break the system, which again, from a balancing standpoint, makes perfect sense. From a what I want to see in my game standpoint, I like that additional degree of breakage that I could have in a game, and limiting some of these things to, hey, when you go ahead, this baker over here, when you go in that column, or row in this case, when you go in that row, you'll get an additional wheat, but once per round. So that means I'm getting a maximum of 5 wheat the entire game from this card, and that's if I get it in round 1. And it still works. It's still important. It's still a huge part of your game and strategy, but it just limits the feeling of just how cool things could be. So those are the 2 things I don't like. I just want cooler things going on in my games, which is a general thing for me. Past that, as far as I can see others not liking, first of all, 2-player versus 3-player, I touched upon this already, very different experiences. 3-player kind of has players doing their own things, and yes, of course you're going to be mindful of others, and yes, of course you'll have to make choices about, I'm going here for me, but I also might block you here. You'll have to make those choices. But you still have to prioritize your own game, and because this is 3 players, or 4 players for that matter, you can't really block someone at the cost of your own actions. Versus in a 2-player game, when you introduce these guys here, they can get a bit meaner. You kind of have people whose sole intent is to block others, which could be a little frustrating for players. You're going to specifically place them in other players' way, and it makes the game a drop meaner, which might not be the experience you're looking for, because after I do the thing that I want, I intentionally try to obstruct the thing you're trying to do at no benefit to myself. And so that's a drop meaner, and it may be a little bit more cutthroat at 2-player than is a 3-player experience. Also, I'll say that the racetrack in particular had this interesting feeling comparable to the other tracks, where the racetrack kind of feels like once you're behind to a degree. It does depend on which areas you're fighting for sure, but in the racing area, there are times where you'll just not really engage with the early game, and by the time you want to engage with it, you have other players who are already trying to get those 3 points every single round, and you're just out of it. If you don't start off on the racing track, usually it's almost not worth going for every single round. The difference between the racing and the area control here is completely late game, so it doesn't feel as bad to start engaging in it late. Versus over here, points are already being given out every single round, and it just feels a little bit more defeating to dive into this if you didn't start off on the racing track. As far as final thoughts on Nova Roma, I overall very much enjoyed this game. This core puzzle over here is just a rewarding little puzzle. This is from Stan Konosky in general. I've talked about it a lot. Fantastic designer who has a large breadth to the way he approaches game design, and almost every game he puts out feels different in some way. And this puzzle here, this is the core aspect that I really enjoy, and the way he just combines everything into it just works well. Also, as usual for me, I like a little bit more cool things going on. The math of making this a balanced game is beautiful, but I also like the brokenness of just like, I want more powers on the cards. I want my cards to not be limited to once per round. Small touches like that. Overall, this is a phenomenally well-designed experience that is incredibly fun to engage with. Gives you the opportunities to explore a lot of the game while feeling like you still want to explore more, and overall, very much enjoyed this one. It's a 4 out of 5. I think it's a great game, worth checking out. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Castle of Burgundy. This game, kind of very much similar to Castle of Burgundy, gave me the sense and feeling that I did manage to explore a lot of it, but that I want a drop more. And then the advisors kind of operate like the science tiles in Castle of Burgundy, giving you small, subtle ways to improve what you're doing and break the game a bit. Not really break the game, just give you that additional little touch of things you can get done. And then secondly, Coimbra. This game, because of the way the puzzle over here gives you that aspect where you kind of have to think before you place and choose based on multiple things that are going to trigger, Coimbra has a very similar idea with the dice in Coimbra. The fact that when you choose dice in Coimbra, you are being mindful of different impacts that the die will have, the color, the value, where it's going. Overall, it gave me a very similar mental puzzle as I tried to struggle my way through this. In any case, until next time, I hope you found this review helpful. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.